You think you're in love. Your brain thinks you're an addict who just ran out of supply. One of you is right, and it's not you. Here's what's actually happening inside your skull right now. Every time she texts you back, your brain releases dopamine. Every time she goes quiet, it cuts the supply. And you, without knowing it, without choosing it, have become completely dependent on a woman's behavior to regulate your own emotional state. You're not in a relationship, you're on a subscription, and she controls the billing. The worst part? You signed up voluntarily. You called it falling in love. Your nervous system called it the most dangerous dependency you've ever developed. And now you're sitting here watching a video trying to figure out why she's pulling back, or how to make her stay, or how to never end up in this position again. I'm going to show you the mechanism, not the advice, the actual machine that's running underneath every relationship you've ever had. And once you see it, you cannot unsee it. That's a warning, not a promise. Your brain runs on dopamine, but here's what they never taught you about it. Dopamine doesn't fire when you get something. It fires when you might get something. The anticipation, the gap, the uncertainty between wanting and having. This is why gambling is more addictive than food. The variable reward, maybe yes, maybe no, you don't know, produces more dopamine than a guaranteed outcome every time. Think about a hobby you've been obsessed with, a sport, a skill, a game. Remember those early weeks, the hours that vanished, falling asleep thinking about it, waking up wanting to get back to it. That wasn't passion. That was dopamine doing its job, rewarding pursuit. Here's the critical part. With a hobby, you control the tap. You decide when you show up, when you get the hit. The source of reward is in your hands. The moment you fall for a woman, the tap physically moves out of your hands into hers. Now she decides, unconsciously, without strategy, just by being human, whether your brain gets its reward today. She texts back fast and your chest opens. She takes 3 hours and you check your phone 12 times. She seems distracted and you spend the next 2 hours trying to figure out what you did wrong. You didn't do anything wrong. You just handed a woman the keys to your neurochemistry and called it romance. There is a specific second in every relationship when a man crosses a line he cannot see. Before that line, he's curious about her, but not convinced she's irreplaceable. He has his own direction. He's evaluating her as much as she's evaluating him. He might leave if something doesn't fit. In this state, without doing anything, without performing anything, he is magnetic. After that line, he's decided. She's the one, the exception, different from every woman before. And the second that conclusion settles in his gut, he is finished. Not because he chose her, because he stopped evaluating. His internal question changed from, does she fit my life, to, how do I make sure I don't lose her? And women feel that shift, not consciously, at the cellular level. I call this the control transfer. After the control transfer, everything he does that he thinks is attractive, being more available, more attentive, more communicative, more present, is actually accelerating her withdrawal. Because what she felt before wasn't his actions. It was his indifference to her approval. And now that indifference is gone, he didn't become less attractive because he cared more. He became less attractive because his caring became visible as need. And need, when a man who hasn't earned the right to need, is the one thing no amount of looks, money, or status can overcome. Here's the part nobody talks about. Every man has an emotional ceiling, a maximum intensity he's experienced in a relationship. The first time everything felt on fire, the obsession, the sleeplessness, the absolute certainty that nothing before this moment counted. Your brain stored that peak as the definition of love, as the benchmark for what real attraction feels like. And then, this is what destroys men for decades. It associated that intensity with everything else present at the time. If that peak arrived wrapped in chaos, in hot and cold behavior, in a woman who was sometimes extraordinary and sometimes completely absent, your brain didn't separate the intensity from the instability. It recorded them as one thing. Now that package is your definition of love. I call this the calibration problem. The man with a high emotional ceiling, usually set by his most intense, most unstable early relationship, will spend the rest of his life being drawn toward chaos, not because he enjoys suffering, because his reward system was trained by an experience that mixed pain and pleasure so completely that calm now feels like a malfunction. This is why men with the most to offer consistently end up with the most destructive women. Not bad luck, calibration. And this is why a genuinely stable, genuinely available woman feels boring to a man whose ceiling was set by disaster. His nervous system isn't reading her as low value, it's reading her as low signal. And to an addicted brain, low signal feels like nothing is happening. The map is wrong. It has always been wrong, and nobody told you, because most of the men around you are navigating by the same broken map and calling it normal. In every relationship, there are 5 moments where dopamine spikes. Men live through all 5. Almost none of them understand what's happening while it's happening. Peak 1, the resistance. She doesn't confirm. She's warm, but not available. Interested, but not committing. Your brain reads this as maximum signal. Uncertain outcome, high potential reward, pursue. The resistance itself produces desire. This is not about her being hard to get. This is your reward circuitry responding to an unsolved variable exactly the way it was designed to. The women who required effort stay in your memory longer. Not because they were better, because friction produces dopamine. Peak 2, the opening, the first 3 to 6 months, the flood. Everything about her seems significant in a way you can't explain. The details accumulate. You're building a story. This peak is not sustainable. And understanding that is not cynicism. It's the difference between a man who builds something real and a man who spends his entire adult life chasing opening acts while wondering why nothing ever develops into what he felt in those first months. Peak 3, the win. She commits. She says yes to the relationship or the apartment or the ring. There's a brief, sharp spike of triumph. Then within days, sometimes hours, it begins to fade. Men panic here. They think something is wrong. Nothing is wrong. The reward was received. The chase ended. The brain is recalibrating for the next phase. Most men don't know there is a next phase. They try to recreate the chase inside a relationship that has already moved past it. This is where things begin to fall apart. Peak 4, the cooling. Somewhere in the middle, she becomes slightly less available, less warm, more distracted. The signal weakens. This is the most important moment in the entire relationship, and almost every man destroys it. The man who panics, who increases his effort, his attention, his visibility, is broadcasting one thing. I noticed you pulling back, and it frightened me. She feels that fear. It confirms that he needs her more than she needs him. She pulls further. The man who doesn't panic, who genuinely, not performatively, continues in his own direction, is broadcasting something else. I noticed, and I'm not afraid. That signal is rarer than any gesture, any gift, any grand romantic act, and it pulls her back without him doing anything. Same situation. completely different internal response. This is why Just Don't Chase Advice fails, because most men are performing non-chasing while internally chasing harder than ever. Women are not fooled, not for long. Peak 5, the end, the final disconnection. This one doesn't just hurt, it restructures a man. Because what he's losing isn't only her, he's losing the version of himself that existed inside that relationship, the man she reflected back, the feeling of being that man. This is why men go back to relationships that were objectively wrong for them. They're not going back to her. They're going back to that internal state, and they'll destroy themselves trying to recreate it through the one source that produced it, even when that source has already moved on. I know what you're thinking, so I just act less invested. No, stop. This is the most repeated mistake in all of modern dating advice. The idea that performed detachment produces the same result as genuine groundedness. It doesn't. It never has. Women don't detect performed coolness intellectually. They detect it in reaction speed, in micro expressions, in the specific way a man's tone shifts when another man is mentioned, in the 1,000 unconscious signals broadcasting the truth underneath the act. You cannot think your way to this. You cannot perform your way to this. The only path is changing the actual internal state, and that begins with one honest question you have probably never asked yourself properly. Have I actually evaluated this woman, or did I just get hit by chemistry and call it certainty? Have you assessed her patterns under pressure? How she treats people who can't do anything for her? What she does when she's wrong? Whether her values, examined clearly, match the life you're actually trying to build? The man who is genuinely evaluating, who has not yet decided, who is watching and measuring and remaining open to the conclusion that this is not the right person, is the most attractive version of himself. Not because of what he does, because of what he hasn't yet surrendered. That internal state of genuine assessment cannot be faked, and it is the only state from which lasting attraction can be built, because it is the only state in which you are still a full person, rather than a half person waiting for her response to complete you. Let me be direct with you. Everything I've described so far, the control transfer, the calibration problem, the 5 peaks, is useless information if you walk away from this video feeling like you finally understand the game. Understanding the game is not the same as changing how you play it. And most men who consume this kind of content use it as a sophisticated way to avoid doing the actual work. So here's the actual work. Step 1. Sit with the discomfort of being alone, without medicating it. Not alone for a week. Not alone until someone interesting appears. Genuinely alone for long enough that the noise settles. Most men have never experienced their own baseline, the emotional state that exists before a woman's attention modifies it. They go from relationship to relationship, from pursuit to pursuit, and they call that living. It isn't. It's a continuous loop of self-medication. The man who has never sat with himself long enough to become comfortable there is not available for a real relationship. He is available for a rescue, and women eventually feel the difference between being chosen and being used as an escape route. 6 months minimum. A year if you've been running for a decade. Step 2. Audit your ceiling honestly. Go back to the relationship that set your emotional benchmark, the one that felt most intense. Now ask yourself, was that intensity built on something real, or was it built on uncertainty, unavailability, and the specific kind of pain that your brain learned to associate with love? If the answer is the second one, and for most men it will be, then your definition of love is a trauma response, wearing a romantic costume, and you will keep casting the same woman in different faces until you consciously dismantle the casting process. This is not therapy speak. This is mechanics. The machine is running a corrupted file. You need to find the file before you can replace it. Step 3. Build one thing that has nothing to do with anyone else. Not for her, not to become more attractive, not as a self-improvement project aimed at the dating market. One thing, a skill, a physical practice, a creative output, a business that you would pursue if no woman ever witnessed it. Something that produces results whether or not anyone validates it. This matters not because discipline is attractive, although it is, but because the man who has built something real has a different relationship with loss. He knows that his value is not located in her response to him. He has evidence, not theory, evidence, and that evidence changes the neurological calculus of every interaction he has with a woman, because he is genuinely less afraid of losing her than a man who has built nothing independent of the relationship. Fear is the root of every unattractive behavior in men. Over-communicating, over-explaining, checking in too often, doing too much. All of it is fear. And the only long-term solution to fear is evidence that you survive without the thing you're afraid of losing. Build the evidence. Step 4. Change what you're optimizing for. Most men enter relationships optimizing for intensity. They want to feel something. They want the flood. They're chasing the emotional ceiling they hit years ago and never recovered from. What you should be optimizing for is function under pressure. How does she handle conflict? Does she go quiet, go nuclear, or stay in the room? How does she treat the relationship when it's inconvenient for her? What does she do when she's wrong? Double down, disappear, or repair? What is her relationship with her own damage? Does she examine it or weaponize it? These are not romantic questions. They are structural questions. And they are the only questions that predict whether a relationship works. At year 7, not just at month 3. The man who evaluates for structure, not for intensity, makes completely different choices. He ends up in fewer relationships, shorter ones when they're wrong, longer ones when they're right, and he stops confusing the flood for the foundation. You came here with a question about how to make a woman fall for you forever. The question itself is the problem. The man trying to make someone fall for him has already positioned himself as the supplicant, the one who needs the outcome, the one for whom the relationship is a destination rather than a byproduct of something larger. The man who makes women fall and keeps them there is not running a strategy. He has built a life that does not require saving by anyone. He chose her after examination, not after being ambushed by chemistry. He remains curious about whether she continues to deserve his attention, not anxious about whether she'll withdraw it. His presence means something because it costs something. His commitment means something because it wasn't automatic. And when he loves from solidity, not from hunger. That's not a technique. That's a complete reorientation of who you are in relation to women, to relationships, and to your own emotional life. It takes longer than watching a video, but it's the only thing that actually works. Everything else you've tried, you already know how that ends.